welcome to today's webinar. We're excited to have you here. We'll be discussing workflow-ready operational strategies for scaling diversified care models. And I do have Heather Ketchum here, who is a home care operations and senior account executive from Alora, joining us. Before we jump in, we'll give everyone another few minutes to join. And part of this is the interaction that we have with you all. If you are here and already joined, if you want to share where you are from, if you're running a home care or home health business. Heather works in many of the states across the U.S. and would love to hear where you're from to maybe tailor the conversation if we have a majority ruling of one state going on. But I know it's always helpful to get that information. So feel free to drop it in the attendee chat. We love hearing from you, knowing who's here, and we'll get started shortly. Before we jump in, I just want to go through some housekeeping. The windows on your screen can be resized and moved. You could set it up however you'd like. The icons at the bottom of your screen open tools that let you ask for help and download slides. There are no slides attached today since Heather and I are just having an educational conversation. But if you need any resources, you can drop it in the chat and we can connect with you that way. There is a Q&A if you want to send any questions privately. There's an attendee chat and a volume settings. We will send a link to rewatch and share the webinar on demand. So if you want to share this with anyone in your office, we get requests like that all the time. You will receive that. And if you don't, you can reach out to Heather and myself. Be sure to send it over. Moving on, I do like to give credit where credit is due. Alora has been acquired by LivTech, and LivTech is their parent company. LivTech has many different companies and tech solutions in the post-acute healthcare space. So there's a senior living division, physician, and in-home care. I know most of you here today will be in home care, either home health, hospice, or home care, and we're really excited to have you. I did want to highlight some of the other solutions, again, backed by LivTech, mostly because there's actually a lot of overlap, and Heather and I work closely with those who are like, you have other solutions, part of the LivTech brand? That's really interesting. So Alora is your all-in-one home care software, scheduling, and billing services for non-medical and home health agencies. Worldview is your document and order management for healthcare, hospice, and palliative care providers. Ally is software built for caregiver registries, for non-medical care registries. And Qualis is hospice DME management and support of hospice providers. So again, if you need anything, we won't be discussing any more of these brands, but we do like to let you know who LivTech is. When you see these brands, you know who they are. And, we'll be kicking off shortly with all the educational materials. So Heather, turning it over to you. We got some pictures in the chat, and we do have some background noise, Heather. I don't know if that's from you. I can mute myself. But.
I'm not positive. I don't have any background noise on my end. Okay. I'm in a quiet room on my end. Can anyone hear any background noise? I'm not sure. I can't tell if folks are muted, not muted.
Yeah, no, I think they're all muted, but it does sound better now. So hopefully it'll go away. And I'll mute myself in a second. But it looks like we have Melissa from Wyoming. We have Laurie from Oregon. So, and I know we have others here, so don't be shy, but we'll give a shout out to them as of now.
And welcome. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, and Heather, I'll pass this over to you. We're excited to discuss a topic that we both know impacts every home-based care organization, regardless of their size, payer mix, or service line, and that's really operational excellence. So before we begin, and I really hand it over to you, I want to start with a poll question, since that's always fun and exciting, to get people to engage. So we'll turn it over to you guys. What is the biggest operational priority you have today? And you could just click some of these if you're open to it. It will give Heather an understanding of where she can then guide the conversation a bit more. See if anyone submits it. Otherwise, Heather, we'll just take it away. See, we have a shy crowd today.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. And maybe it'll spark conversation once we.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can speak directly to some of the states that we're representing today on this call as well, if that's helpful. And as folks kind of answer the poll, perhaps in the background, keep me posted, and we can always pivot. But one of the things that, I've learned working with providers across the country is that these challenges operationally are rarely isolated. You do have some unique considerations in each state, but the challenges themselves regarding documentation and those kind of impacts on compliance are not necessarily isolated, right? They're not unique. They're the same across the board. Compliance impacts reimbursement, and everything we do really links to that billing and payment at the end of the day. So workforce challenges, perhaps, they impact your operations. Growth, right? You think about what your growth goals are, maybe your 1 year goal, your 5-year goals or farther. Those type of growth initiatives, they do impact everything at large. So organizations seeing the most success from my perspective, and for those that I've worked with for years, are really creating operational alignment across all of those areas rather than just managing them independently, right? They're all linked. And so that's what operational excellence it's really about, right? We want to link all of those things, compliance, documentation, workflow management, reaching those goals by nature of setting the right stage. And that's going to be kind of those stepping stones to success from what I've experienced.
Yeah, that's amazing. Does this surprise you that it's growth?
Yeah, I know. We both reacted simultaneously. Growth is 85% of the response here on the call. Documentation, another. And that really speaks to what I was just mentioning. So it's really nice to see that kind of align, right? And I love that you have growth goals, and feel free to chime in on the chat when I say things like this. Do you feel like, on the daily, you're operating with all of the ins and outs of the day as opposed to being able to focus on those growth goals? There's a lot of balance on, well, I'm working on my documentation, because if I don't do that, then I won't necessarily get paid, or I might be out of compliance. If your world is focused on that alone for the majority of the time, that can be incredibly challenging. And that's what I think I read when I see results like that. And I'm hearing a resounding yes in the chat with multiple exclamation points. So my goal today is to give you some takeaways, right? We Rachel and I are very interactive people. So the goal of this call is to really kind of review some of this and give you some action items that you can take back and review and maybe evaluate internally. And then we can maybe have a subsequent call and conversation on how to redirect or get you in a place where you feel like you have some consistency.
That's awesome, Heather. Yeah, I love this. And again, Heather and I love the interaction. So the more you interact with us, the more benefit you'll get out of it. So Heather, when you think about operational excellence, what really comes to mind?
So what comes to mind is not perfection, right? I want to make sure that everybody understands you don't need to be perfect in this way. I think what matters is consistency, right? You want to operate your business, your organization with consistency. And what we see is success creates visibility, accountability, scalability, all the things that you want to be able to do. So for me, operational excellence means information that moves efficiently, right? When people are clocking in and out, that's one thing, but is that information moving consistently with your documentation, with your plan of care, with all the things that need to align, again, at the end of the day, when you get to the billing stage, and now we have to figure out how to bill. Welcome, Florida. The other thing that I think is really important are teams that understand their expectations, right? They understand actually what your goals are. And just sidebar, I may ask on this call, are you all owners of your organizations? Are you operations managers? Are you nurses? Like, kind of really, what is your role? Most people will say they wear many hats. Love that. This is a perfect conversation for you. So teams that understand expectations, documentation that does support care, but not so much where you feel like you're eyeballs deep in all of that documentation. There are actually solutions out there that can make your documentation process consistent and easy to manage without having to slow down your growth goals. We'll talk about that. Compliance and reimbursement, we've mentioned a few times. And leadership, Well, that's awesome. And congratulations on all of our owners here. This is a big deal. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join. We have a biller and a scheduler on the call. And again, for someone that's a biller on the call, this conversation will resonate with your owner, with other folks that you're working with in the office, because there's not a silo of duties. This all kind of comes together in congruency with your individual roles. So leadership has visibility into performance, right? And so those processes can scale as the organization grows. Process should always be reevaluated on at least maybe a quarterly basis, or at least halfway through the year, or at a very bare minimum annually.
Yeah. And Heather, it's interesting because all of this is so interesting, but is there a reason why it's becoming more important today? Like, what's going on in the climate, right? You speak to people all day long, but there's so many factors that are making it so much more important today. AI, right? The changes in the workforce, legislative changes. But why is that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, organizations currently are managing more payer sources, and payer sources are changing. Regulations of those payer sources are changing. Programs are being overfunded, so then they pivot. More service lines. I think the more that you can organize your business operationally, the more you can actually focus on the benefits that your clients actually have. And then you can tap into more service lines, which by default will manage your growth. Right. And so you can actually capture more auths for more, like I said, lines of service and care, and provide more opportunity to help the individuals that you set on to assist in the home. More workforce challenges, as you mentioned. I think that's always been kind of a reoccurring theme. There's ways to kind of work in and around that as well, but setting proper expectations, I think, do help with that. And there's more documentation requirements. We all know back in the day, EVV was the thing, right? People would call us and say, I need EVV. Well, now that's been established, right? So the industry in many ways, and in many states, folks on this call can say that their areas may be saturated. Well, the state's coming in and evaluating your documentation. It's not that you just documented. Is it consistent? Are all of your caregivers kind of operating in a way where they're keeping their notes in a similar format, in a similar template, so that there's consistency across the board, so that everybody in the office kind of knows what's happening out in the field, and the caregivers are kind of reporting on those expectations. At the same time, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it sounds like it's not necessarily about working harder either, right?
No, not at all, actually. And it's not that that the harder piece is the case. It's really kind of just breaking down the little bits. And a lot of times folks that have talked to me before will say, they'll hear me say, sometimes you have to slow down to get fast. And it's okay to slow down and evaluate and look. That's okay. Because if anything, that's just going to make the situation easier in the long run, right? Like it's best just to kind of slam the brakes on for a minute, or at least slow them down, look at everything as a leader, and then ask those questions so that you can put together the resources that you need to rebuild maybe the foundation, or just fix some of the things along the way that may have been roadblocks for the growth that you've tried to establish. One of the pattern, though, that I do see repeatedly in organizations that are trying to successfully grow, they do discover, and I think this is a good segue, that the workflows that supported the 10 clients they had at the beginning doesn't necessarily support the workflow at the 50 or the 100 mark. So if you can think of your business like, I may have 5 clients, but pretend you have 50. If you had 50 with what you're doing now, would that support 50 or 100? Chances are no, if that was a yes or no poll question. I think growth doesn't create operational challenges. It actually exposes them, because you are building around where you were in the moment.
It's really powerful, but it's true, right? You could get away with so much when you're small, growing, figuring things out. But as you get bigger, it's not scalable, frankly.
Exactly. And I think, as organizations try to scale successfully, the ones that I've worked with that are kind of in that track, they don't rely necessarily on, you know, the instantaneous troubleshooting or the heroics of the day. That's not sustainable over the long run, right?
Yeah.
You need to rely on consistent, repeatable process so that you keep your head above water, honestly, and you can go out in the field and build those relationships and gain your reputation in the community.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, Heather, we're going to pivot a little bit to diversifying the payer sources and, you know, expanding services, which is really an exciting topic. I just want to shout out that we had a lot of people contribute in the chat. So thank you. Just to get an idea of who we have joining us today. We have some owners, a health advocate, we have billers, schedulers, managers, administrators. So we really do have a big mix, which is great, you know, but I know this conversation will touch them each very differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that diversification too is expansion of the organization. I note that Arizona's on this call. There's a lot of folks that may have a business in one state and they diversify into another state. All the more reason to set that strong foundation, because, you know, you need to have your attention in maybe two places, right? And so, you know, folks that are in Michigan often have another location in Ohio, we've experienced, and those sort of things too. So that can be part of that diversification conversation as well. One of the things that I find with diversification is it really does create resilience. Going into multiple payer models, private pay, 100% of the margins are yours. It's great to go into the private pay sector because, again, you're just reinvesting that money into your there's one right here where you have Idaho and California. So they're in the process of adding multiple locations to their repertoire. And so now you're looking at regulations in California, in Idaho, in Arizona, in Michigan, in all these different places. And again, I'm just shouting out different states that I know are on here. Florida is another one that folks are diversifying in because of, you know, the capability to tap into the private pay market. And so you have more Medicaid waiver programs, home health, we have maybe hospice, community-based services, the VA. There's actually a lot of stipend programs out there that you can take advantage of. And the more that you learn about those programs, again, and the benefits of your client, the more you're going to be able to diversify into those areas.
Amazing. And what are some of the benefits that include, you know, diversifying?
Well, certainly revenue, right? I mean, I think that is a big part of it. The revenue diversification is what people are looking for.
Not depending on one payer source exclusively.
Exactly. And that lends itself to you understanding those programs really well. Again, strong foundation, so I can focus on learning those programs and diving into what those programs mean. Right. And so that is going to be a big deal as you kind of work in multiple states, perhaps, or just in your own state. Indiana's on the call, and Indiana has changed their programs multiple times due to funding, et cetera, and a variety of other reasons. And so that's something that you really need to be hard and fast focused on as well. So that's a big deal, too. Continuity of care, I think, is a big one. And also referral sources. You really want multiple referral source opportunities to bring in care in the home. And that could be anything in that full post-acute care space. I think all in all, marketing, you know, just that market expansion, I think is really common to see, right? You're always kind of looking at the latest program that might be available to your agency, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's probably a fourth one that I might mention.
Yeah, and this, Heather, this all sounds amazing, but we're talking about operational growth and strategies and challenges, right? As you think about expanding your payer sources, what operational challenges do you see that come up for home care agency owners, the billers, the schedulers, right? The growth doesn't come without adjustments that need to be made.
Yeah, and I've got a few billers on the call. You know, we've got Gerda, we've got Cindy, maybe some others. Obviously, owners are tapping into, obviously, their billing side to map up their make sure that their revenue is there. They know how to track it. The different payer sources, though, I think you have to be very cognizant of authorization requirements. that's a big one. And I think our billers would agree that really keeping close track of those authorization requirements is a huge part of this puzzle, and different reimbursement methodologies. So, what is the time frame of which you need to get that claim in? And so you might have that 90 days, but all the documentation and all the diagnosis codes and all of the authorizations should have set the stage through proper workflow at the beginning so that you can always make that mark. In my opinion, I don't even want to get near the 90 days. I want my money now. So I want to have all of that dialed in at the beginning so my days to payment are far shorter. I get paid quicker because everything's accurate. I know exactly what I need to put where, and the system that maybe you might be using should be tracking those things in a logical way so that you can just let it go out into the aggregation and off to the payer, and then you can get paid. It really can be and should be that simple. I think different documentation expectations are another one. Each state now is starting to require tighter documentation, again, consistency. And I think the quicker you create that now, and honestly, tell your caregivers, your aides, your nurses, just a little bit of the why, and it puts some perspective behind why this is actually necessary. And by nature of that, you'll fall into better audit requirements, and that will set your mind at ease when someone walks in the door and said, oh, we're auditing your office this month, and you know that you're good to go. So payer sources is one, and I think service lines is the other. So we've got different workflows for different service lines. That might require different staffing, right? Depending on those service lines, we might need a nurse, we might need a CNA, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously there's different compliance considerations as well.
Wow. And we have some people from different states joining us. Some people watch this on demand, but can you share some examples you're seeing across the country? I know there are some states that we chat about offline, but just some examples about some specific states, and maybe if you know anything specifically about some of those states that, are here right now. But it's always great to get that perspective.
Yeah, happy to. And, I would say off the top of my head, Indiana Pathways, introduced this payer-specific authorization workflow requirement. Again, that just links to what we just said, right? That kind of differentiates that program and makes it very difficult to get paid if those things aren't put in place properly. Ohio Passport is another one where providers continue to operate in a very highly structured waiver environment. And whether it's Indiana or Ohio or other programs around the country, it's the waiver programs that honestly are more structured, where the service delivery documentation all has to line up in order for those approvals to take place. Pennsylvania also has an extensive program that provides kind of this balance with EVV requirement and authorization alignment. There are multiple states now, including Pennsylvania, that are now requiring an EVV compliance rate. They actually have to be 85% compliant in their EVV in order to get paid in many programs. And that may trickle to other states as well. And just keeping that in mind, if it hasn't hit your state yet, that doesn't mean you can't be proactive now. Think this entire conversation is about being proactive as opposed to reactive. So if you can get your EVV compliance rate up as a goal in your own organization, then when that ruling comes around, you don't have anything to worry about because everybody's clocking in and out the proper way with the right tools, mind you, because there are some out there maybe that aren't as reliable. And again, you want to have those right tools to set the stage for success. Like, honestly, the bottom line is it's less rework and corrections and going back to data that you would never have to do otherwise, which is always the goal, I think, for everybody on the call.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I just met with someone renewing their license in Florida the other day, and she was telling me about the process. They could show up whenever, and within that time frame, and she had all her ducks in a row. And yes, there's it's nerve wracking, but because she prepares and runs her business in that way, that she always has those things set up, it was much smoother sailing than someone who's like, oh wow, I have to organize this all right now. I have to check my EVV compliance. I have to check all these things because she just operates like that all the time. So, operational excellence can be done sporadically. It could be done in a panic, or you could just set yourself up for success to kind of run.
I love that. That's actually a really great example. And I think ultimately the whole idea is to take one's shoulders and just like have that moment of just like, it's fine. You know, I'm not working in organized chaos. And you've got to remember, all of you on this call, you built incredible businesses. And the fact of the matter is that some just started right out and they hit the ground running. That's awesome. But it's okay to kind of, like I said, to go back to the beginning and say, just slow down for a little bit. Let's just clean some things up, because we want to plan for the 87% hole here that we want to be in growth mode. And what does that look like? We may have to look at our operations and our workflow management in order to set the stage for the 200 clients that we want to have and we will have, right? Let's think glass half full on that. And so we're not operating in the 10 or the startup phase. We're thinking, you know, a year from now, I'm going to have 100 clients. Am I going to be able to do that with what I have right now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And all that you're saying is really just echoing that, you know, growth itself is not the challenge. It's a good thing. We had it here in the poll, right? The top, not challenge, but the top opportunity for everyone is they're looking to grow. So, you know, definitely aligns.
And growth is exciting. So that really speaks to diversification. You want to learn more about how to diversify in those areas? We can have another conversation about that as well. Again, private pay, 100% of the margins are yours. Do you know where your high income areas are? Do you know how to build concierge services to set yourself apart? Do you understand the benefits of your client? Say they give you one authorization. They can get more than one authorization for a variety of care. You might be able to do homemaker services, companion, attendant care, you know, and have multiple authorizations, which basically extends their care, brings more revenue to you, makes the client stickier to you to some extent, because now you may be able to latch on private pay services in addition to whatever you're billing for insurance. Those are some interesting kind of angles, but that could be for another time.
Yeah. I do want to circle back to something that you said earlier, or something that I picked up on. Documentation is often viewed as a compliance requirement, but you tend to talk about it differently, or I get a sense that you do. Why is that?
Yeah. I do actually. Documentation is the picture, it's the painting of what occurred at any one point in your organization. And many of us on this call might say that we don't remember what we had for lunch yesterday. So if someone were to ask, you know, do you have this, or do you remember the incident that occurred on X date? Historical documentation was kind of back in the day, really viewed as kind of a clinical responsibility. But for me today, I think it's the strongest organizations view documentation as more of a strategy, right? It supports your care quality. You can refer back to it, so you can ensure the families that you're providing the best care for my mom. If my mom lives in Arizona and I look for Dominique and I say, I would love for you to take care of my mom. I heard you had a great agency. Your documentation is going to support that, because I don't live there and neither do any of my siblings. It supports communication, not only to you, to your staff, again, to the families, maybe to the payers, maybe to support, if you're reaching out to support in a variety of ways. Compliance, obviously, is a big one. Ultimately, reimbursement all day long. It's about getting paid. And if your documentation supports what you've done, then more likely you will get paid. I will throw out an example like South Carolina. South Carolina is a closed state. Texas is a closed state. In those scenarios, sometimes they have folks clocking in and out. In other states too, they have them clocking in and out with more than one device. A lot of times that happens because they're building documentation to support reimbursement, right? If the app doesn't work over here and I don't have the proper documentation, many payers are not going to accept a paper timesheet. So they might have something that's redundant or something like that that might capture that information. Now we can prove documentation to support X. So there's certain states that are kind of pivoting in their own way to still capture this in order to get those days of payment to be quicker. I think audit readiness goes with our compliance conversation, right? And so if your documentation is there, if there's anyone on the call from Virginia, I know there's a lot of auditing happening in Virginia, also in Minnesota. And if you are prepared on your documentation side, then you're likely to pass that audit. What they are including in that audit, though, is consistency in your note taking and your documentation. So if I were to go to someone's house and say, how did they do today? And I just write good, or some of my own notes because of the way I talk, and Rachel talks differently than I do, so she writes her notes the way she does. You can see we both documented, but it's inconsistent, right? And we may have to go back and check and change and things like that. That could affect a time card. That could affect whatever's going to end up being submitted to the payer, and that could be a ding against the agency. So create consistency and documentation up front. Again, proactive. And again, it helps you scale because now we can read the documentation and we can see where our strengths lie. And maybe you build your business in that area, and that's your differentiator.
Yeah, and I assume there's reasons why this is becoming more important now.
Yeah, it is actually. As states and payers and auditors and Medicare, a lot of folks in different states, they're tapping into home health as well, not just the non-skilled space. And as they continue to focus on that, documentation and quality and consistency of that documentation is becoming increasingly important. I can tell you in the Medicare space, emphasizing medical necessity, status of being homebound for perhaps just functional status, your accuracy on OASIS. I think those are the high points for the Medicare side. And on the Medicaid side, I would say the waiver programs, again, are just becoming increasingly documentation heavy with the combination of the connection between plans of care, authorization, the initial assessment, and then obviously it trickles to EVV and billing services. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, this is going to be a good question. I love this. I mean, you talk to organizations all the time. What are some of the secrets or the things that strong organizations are doing right now? What are they doing well? Right? Like if people here on the call want to copy those folks set up for success, what are they doing well?
Well, they're creating more consistency and they're sticking to it, right? We're not just reacting to something that's coming through the door. We're creating process and consistency around these scenarios. So I think that's really, really important. I think everybody on the call at some point or another, in order to even get licensed or just to maintain your business at the beginning, you all created some sort of process and procedure. I know in certain states they require that as part of your licensure, but that should be evaluated along the way. So creating consistency around that, I think, is really, really important, and be diligent about that. I often see organizations that pass audits, but still struggle operationally because because their documentation is being completed differently across the team. Tighten that up. Like we can create templates of what we'd like to see and then make it specific to the client record, for example. 3 staff members maybe documented the same type of service in 3 different ways. Think of it like that. And I think everybody on the call has probably seen that happen in their documentation, right? And when that final timesheet comes across, that creates quality assurance review, extra work for you all, your staff. It will create billing questions without a doubt. It creates communication challenges because we don't always remember what happened in order to be more specific maybe in a certain area, which ultimately just creates rework, which we don't have time for.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this just proves your point or it illustrates it even further. Documentation isn't just a clinical conversation anymore. Like it's much bigger than that.
It is. Yep, it absolutely is. It's really becoming the standard for just operational excellence in general. And again, this isn't new information. It's just that the states are becoming more and more hyper-focused on that because, again, EVV was a thing. We've solved that. Everybody needs EVV. We understand that in certain scenarios. But now they're focusing on the accuracy of EVV, raise the bar. The bar's not on the ground. And then they're also taking that documentation consistency across teams, right? All of our communication across teams, and they're raising the bar on that as well, which is great, right? I mean, if it was my mom, I would love to make sure that the quality of care was amazing for Ellie. She's a hoot, and everybody has a loved one that they may have started their businesses around or something. And I think that's how we all got started in this industry, is because we care so much about those that might have been lacking at one point or another. And this just raises the bar and gives everyone a level of comfort. And you all can be a part of that change and that success.
Yeah, 100%. Moving on to what creates the biggest operational challenges and, biggest operational bottlenecks, I am going to launch another poll here. We have a chatty group. I, hope everyone participates in this. But what creates the most rework in your organization right now, right? This will help us understand, or you can see what others are facing as their biggest operational bottleneck right now. These are some of the things that, Heather came up with and I collaborated with her on. But I'd be curious to know what creates the most rework in your organization right now. I'll leave this poll question up for a second while I catch up with the chat, see if there's anything else going on there.
No, I love that. And if it's all right, I might say that I personally have seen one of the biggest themes that I see in organizational and operational friction is scheduling that supports the documentation, right? Because there's a trickle-down effect to everyone's role. Because someone set the stage with maybe an authorization or that initial assessment. We might need to rework that assessment over time. The same assessment doesn't work for, 6 months. Maybe it does, but oftentimes we have to relook at that plan of care, right? And that stems off of the assessment, which is why that schedule was put in place in the first place. So I hope that folks on the call can kind of see that there's really like this overarching, everybody kind of has a role in it. Right? Like, I'll tell a little story if we have a moment while they're working on their poll. 100 years ago, give or take, I was a lifeguard, right? And so we all had our chairs. But what you may not know is that everyone that sits in one of those chairs has overlapping water with the person next to them. So you're not always looking at your own little piece of water, right? Rachel's chair overlaps the water with my chair. So there's always a little bit of overlap between roles that helps us all actually work together. And I really kind of love that analogy because it just sets your mind at ease knowing that you're kind of linking arms with the folks that are next to you, that you're working with every day. And I kind of go back to that every once in a while because I think I get to experience that with our own organization. And I know that you all kind of experience that in yours as well, but it does give you a little bit of comfort to know that your scheduler is backing up the authorization person who's setting the stage for the biller, things like that. So,
yeah. Of course. Well, I'll launch this poll real quick so you could just get a flavor and see, or everyone could get a sense of what we're seeing across the board. It was like scheduling changes is a big one. It's always been the case.
This is an awesome group, but honestly, it kind of validates what we're talking about today because these are the things that we're mentioning, right? It's documentation corrections. It's the EVV expectations, and it's the communication gaps. Mm-hmm. This has really kind of been like the theme of what I've noticed. And so what the goal is today is to really talk about towards the end of our conversation here are what some things that we can do to set the stage to close the gap on those main concerns. The documentation that supports that oversight could be clinical, even if it's clinical versus non-skilled, still we're trying to create that consistency. Billing readiness that does support reimbursement, but that's only going to happen if you have proper expectations on the EVV side, right? Doesn't mean if your EVV has to be stored by the aggregator or if it travels with a claim. It still has to be validated in setting the stage for possible audit. So those are some of the things that I see, and I'm glad I see that resonated here. Ultimately, it's reimbursement that supports growth because when you get reimbursed, you've got the capital to be able to reinvest and open up that California location, that Idaho location, that Arizona location, or just expand in your own state, in your own area, and be the premier agency that everyone is going to choose because you've established that neat and tidy organization to the point where, it trickles into the community.
Yeah. Well, how do you tell, Heather, where organizations are typically experience friction when you talk to them?
I often, I would say that I many times ask, I ask information like, if, how many times is the same information, trying to figure out how to word this so everybody can kind of resonate based on their role. How many times does the same information get touched before a claim actually gets billed? And oftentimes it becomes the
Like 10
scheduler.
people.
Yep. It's a lot of people, right? So it becomes where it gets kicked back and forth. And a lot of that is like, hey, we don't have enough documentation on this. So it might go back to the caregiver. But if we had that template and we had that consistency, we could probably cross that one off. It might go back to the scheduler, right? Because there's an authorization attached. And maybe the scheduler's like, wait, I thought I moved this and I thought that they were supposed to work from 8 to 4, but that recurring schedule says 10 to noon. You know, where's the gap there? Because the time card doesn't match what I thought I was doing. So there might be a gap before it gets to the claim. A supervisor might be notified for kickback, right? That happens a lot for correction. Your quality assurance bins, as I say it in our system, might get inundated and get full and require a lot of work for you to clean those out and get those managed. So yeah, I would say there's probably 5 minimum touches before a claim can actually get billed.
That's a lot. And what does this sort of friction cost the organization, other than frustration?
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody's time is worth money, so we know that. But I'm going to say time, visibility, right? There's a lot of things that might be missing and gaps, so then you don't have visibility, so that makes it harder to find things out. Accountability, understanding, again, a little bit of the why of how, you know, I'm going to use some folks on the call as examples, how Cindy needs to do her job, and then Rhonda can do hers because she understands a little bit about what Cindy does, right? Kind of break down some of that so we're linked. The operational excellence is not always about adding resources. I really want to put a giant little billboard on that, right? It doesn't mean adding more people necessarily. We don't need more FTE and maybe more expense.
People always think they're like, we're overwhelmed, things aren't working, let's add more people.
More people.
Sometimes it's not always the case, and people are awesome, right? We love them, but that's awesome. Not always a solution.
No, and it may be someday, and it may be at that point, but in an organized way, right? Like we need to have a specific reason why that person is in that seat. It's not often about reducing unnecessary handoffs and creating like more visibility across the organization. It's really about getting it dialed in where you sit now before you add more to that plate. So we don't need to necessarily add more people. And you might say, I don't know enough about X, Y, or Z. This lady seems to be an expert, or this guy. And so I'm just going to hire them and then they're going to solve that thing. Remember, that thing is actually linked to 7 other things. And so it's best you learn and know how it works in order to coach and create that that consistent culture in your organization.
Yeah. And just to recap what you said, it sounds like the characteristics you're consistently seeing among organizations that are scaling successfully is visibility, consistency, and accountability. But what makes
I would agree with that.
An important advantage? Like, why is visibility an important advantage for them, especially as I think about the market and being successful on
yes. That's an awesome question. And I would say to that, it really allows you to see success by knowing what's complete, right? Send it on its merry way. What's delayed, that's going to delay you on revenue, right? And then what's really at risk? Is this even going to get paid? How long has this been sitting there? Did I lose my way in the back and forth and the forth and back? Perhaps. Yeah. So I would say what's complete, what's delayed, and what's at risk. Those are the 3 that I would shout out.
Yeah. Now, what separates organizations that react from organizations that plan, right? It's like the reactive organizations and others that are like, no, we know this is coming. How do you see that play out in real life?
I think it's just the maturity of the operations of the office, and that comes with time, right? We all have to start somewhere. But organizations that do create that consistency, the visibility, the accountability, they're better positioned to anticipate challenges before they become problems. And the way you'll hear, and Rachel will smile when I say this because I say this all the time, but I always say, if I'm not worried, you're not worried, right? And so if you've set the stage and you've done a good job with that, let them change their programs, let them change their waivers. If you're not worried, I'm not worried. I can pivot over here because I already have this all dialed in over here. I can anticipate anything. You can imagine if anyone has cared for folks or has children or pets or whatever your situation holds, if you ran the same track every single day and somebody threw something sideways in at your schedule, could you handle it? Right? We don't, and there's two ways. You can say you handled it, but you did it just because you had to. And usually that's organized chaos, right? Again, we're trying to, like we said at the very beginning, we're not doing heroics here. We need to say we did it in heroics for that one moment, but that's not sustainable for the long run. So could you do it? Well, I could, because I have everything else organized in such a way where I have carved out some time where I could maybe switch around a few things to pull that off. So I think there's two ways you thoughtfully think about it. And really, when we get done with this call, I think there'll be some time to personally reflect for everyone to say, wait a second, could I really, if, are you in heroics, or are you in a position where you feel like you are operating in this consistency space so that you can focus on those growth goals that you were set out to accomplish when you started your business?
Yeah, 100%. And, Heather, we are coming at a bit of time. I want to leave some time for Q&A and just, let people get back to their day. So I'm going to skip a bit ahead and have us round up the conversation. As leaders think about today's discussion, what are some questions they should take back to their organization, right? We love ending with key takeaways, right? So they could take some notes, they could listen to this, but, as an advisor, right? Because that's what you are. You're an advisor in this space. You talk to agencies all day long, but, what are some questions they could take back to their organizations, to understand, are we set up for success the way that you would prescribe or the way you've seen it work for others?
I love that. And again, this is a time to kind of reflect and really think about this. And it's all possible, by the way. I would say, can our current, and maybe we can send something after the call or what have you, but fact of the matter is I would say, can your current process support the growth goals that you have? That's the first one that we talked about at the very beginning. I would say, is your documentation consistent enough to support compliance and reimbursement and the way the industry is headed, right? It might fit the bill for now, but is it going to hold true in the long run? Do we have visibility into our biggest operational bottlenecks? That is a tough one, because oftentimes we can't really see what those bottlenecks are. We just see that one employee might be having a struggle, and then another one struggling with a schedule over here, but there could be a bottleneck somewhere in the way. So think of the lifeguard rule and that overlap, and figure that might be part of your bottleneck. Is there might be, a gap in that overlap and in that linking. So something to think about on bottlenecks. And I would say, are we reducing administrative burden, or are we adding to it? Right? More isn't always less. Are we preparing for future growth or managing today's challenges? I think is the ultimate theme of this particular conversation. You don't need to solve all of these tomorrow, by the way. But if today's discussion does cause you to evaluate,
I'll drop it in the chat
differently.
Notes.
Yeah, that would be great. But I think if it helps you evaluate your workflow differently while you're thinking of diversification, perhaps, identify a source of friction, just any one of those things, and improve on that one thing. And I would start with just documentation consistency, right? Uncover an opportunity for improvement, because there's many, right? We always should be looking at process and procedure at least annually. And then we've accomplished a goal. And then you chip off the next piece.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Heather. This has been lovely. I do want to give an opportunity for Q&A. We'll look through the chat, see if there's anything that came in. Before we do that, I'm just going to move on. Your feedback is very important to us. If you have any feedback that you want to share, either via email or in the Q&A, however you want to get it to us, we love hearing some feedback from you. And we are going to leave up this poll question. Heather works with Alora, and she does a great job of helping agencies set themselves up for success. She can work with you to help you stop patching together multiple systems to run one true operation, a stronger system, even just to kind of chat and see what might be going wrong. We have a lot of people that come to us with billing complexities and hurdles, and they just want to get paid right at the end of the day. So Heather, I'll leave this poll up. If anyone wants to answer, no pressure. Obviously, we love having you. Some of you might be customers of Alora or using a different platform. That's all good. But Heather is fantastic. You might see her at some of the upcoming conferences she'll be talking at. And, Heather, I'll give you a moment to share what you do at Alora if you'd like, and then we will go into Q&A, and we'll put this up while we do that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for setting this up, Rachel. And I think just for everyone here, my background is actually in operations and workflow management. I have a specialty in healthcare, and wellness. But to speak to this, I think operational excellence in my professional expertise is really a commitment to continuing improving the way work gets done. Think of it that way. The organizations that thrive that I've seen over the next, say, 5 years, if they don't have really solid workflow in place that meets those compliance standards, that may preclude them from their growth goals. It's really about building that strong foundation. And then when the organization creates that consistency and that visibility that we talked about, while remaining adaptable and embrace change, I think is a big one. You will reach your growth goals for sure. And I will gladly talk to anyone on the call that says, oh, you know what, this resonated with me today, and I just would love to pick your brain on this workflow that is just not working, or this is kind of, caused us some issues in an audit. What have you experienced? I will gladly just consult and have that conversation with you. That's not a problem at all. I think there's obviously some consistency across the board here, and we've got at least, 7, 8 different states on here that are experiencing the same type of thing. So, yeah, reach out and I'll gladly, review, each and every one of your thoughts on this for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And, it's interesting because everyone has different bottlenecks. And, Lori shared in the chat, I don't know if you saw it, that for her, it's a lack of having an open API between her system and her accounting software, which creates too many manual processes and the potential for more human error. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that one before.
I love
multiple
that.
systems. Yeah. But if you have anything else to shed light on for Lori, that's kind of a comment that came in.
Lori, we can chat about that, because even though we have an open API on our end, but a lot of other organizations do not. But we have a lot of comprehensive reporting that might be congruent to what you're trying to pull and get, or without knowing. I don't know if you're using QuickBooks or what you're using in that regard, but if you could find something that already did all the billing and automatic AR reconciliation, that might solve quite a bit. You may be just using it that way because that's how you started at the beginning. But again, that could prompt another fabulous conversation. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, definitely. And we had another question come in privately, asking about Florida. Do you have anything to share about what you're seeing in Florida specifically?
Yeah, so in Florida in particular, they're tightening down on compliance, especially documentation. There's been a lot of program opportunity in Florida, but you do have to be very specific on your documentation nowadays. And they are getting more particular on that EVV accuracy. So you have to have EVV accuracy and minimize the number of times that you're editing time. I think that's a big deal in Florida currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then Lori says she's currently an Alora customer, and I'd love to discuss this with you. I would love that. And thank you for being an Alora customer. That's amazing. You also asked another question here. She said, also, is it critical to have a line of credit in this current environment? I haven't heard that would be critical necessarily. Are you talking about for growth, Lori? Like for investing in more growth opportunity, or let me know what you're looking for there, and I'm happy to speak on that. And she also mentioned that, while we were chatting too, that it ensures complete transparency. This is really important. We really want transparency across the board. Less edits, less changes, less questions across team members.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Heather, if there's nothing else, again, people know how to reach us. Was that Lori? Someone just dropped it. Oh, she dropped in some feedback, but otherwise we can wrap up.
I would love that. And yeah, no, this is great. One of the things I do want to point out for Florida, though, is long-term care for Medicaid services are being administered through managed care organizations rather than through that traditional fee-for-service, which is Medicaid. So I think long-term care is a bit of a nuance in Florida. So if you're going to be dabbling in long-term care, we can talk further about that as well. I'm not sure who posed that question, but I think that's an important one for our Florida guest on the call.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well,
Yeah.
Heather, with that, we will close it out. Again, I know this won't be the last. I love doing this with you.
Thank you.
Having this opportunity to share your knowledge with others. So for anyone who joined, look out for some of the next ones that we'll hopefully be putting out in the near future. And we appreciate your time and thank you for joining. So with
Thank
that,
you so much.
thank you.